The room wasn't built for confessions. It was built for branding, soft lighting, velvet chairs, gold microphones, and carefully timed edits. A podcast, technically. But this episode wasn't going to be cut. Because the moment the cameras rolled, something shifted. Katt Williams leaned forward first. He didn't crack a joke. He didn't smile. He just looked into the lens like it owed him something. "I've stayed quiet long enough," he said. The host barely reacted. He already knew this wasn't going to be a typical episode. What he didn't expect was the man seated next to Katt. Terrence Howard. Still. Focused. Eyes lowered. Like someone who had made peace with what was about to happen. Katt reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He didn't read from it. He didn't need to. "You ever see a man build an empire so clean," he said, "that nobody asked where the bricks came from?" Terrence nodded. Still no words. Katt glanced over. "Tell him." Terrence took a breath, slow and shallow, and then finally looked up. "I saw the contracts," he said. "I saw who signed them. And I saw who was warned not to." The room tightened. No one moved. "This isn't about drama," Katt added. "This is about silence. Bought and managed." The host tried to cut in. "You're talking about..." Katt raised a hand. "You know who we're talking about. Everybody does. But only some of us got close enough to see the price tag." Terrence folded his hands. "There's a reason why people vanish after they say his name." That was the first time the audience watching live paused their comments. Because they weren't accusing. They were remembering. Tyler Perry's name had floated around 1,000 rumors for years. But nothing stuck. Nothing got close enough. Until now. Katt smiled. Not amused, but resolved. "They call it protection," he said. "But it's really just packaging." He packaged himself so clean the industry forgot what he used to do behind those studio doors. Terrence looked up again. "Do you know why I walked away from a $20 million role?" he asked. The host shook his head. "Because I said no to something I wasn't supposed to refuse. And they told me, Tyler already agreed to it. Why can't you?" The air went thin. Katt unfolded the paper and slid it across the table. A contract. Blacked out names. But one signature remained. Visible. And familiar. "You think you got here by just writing plays?" Katt asked. The camera didn't cut. The room didn't breathe. The paper sat between them. Bare, real, impossible to unsee. The signature at the bottom wasn't in cursive. It was printed. Intentional. Like someone wanted it read quickly. No confusion. Tyler Perry. Terrence didn't look at the paper. He had already memorized it. Years ago. Katt tapped the table gently. "This document right here? It's not from a movie. It's from a deal. A real one. And do you know what was traded?" He paused. Silence. The host tried again, voice shaking slightly. "Are you saying?" Terrence leaned in. Just enough for the camera to find him. "We're not saying. We're remembering." Katt chuckled once, dry and hollow. "You know how many young actors been through those sound stages? How many writers got told, 'This is your break, but first, sit down and listen'?" He shook his head. And nobody ever asked who they were listening to. The live stream chat was now moving too fast to read. Screenshots. Stun emojis. Clips being clipped in real time. But the men at the table weren't watching. They were still inside the memory. Terrence rested his fingers on the table edge. "You think people leave Hollywood because they get tired?" Katt looked over, eyebrow raised. "Nah," he said. "They leave because they get told what they're now responsible for. And some of us say no." The host stared at them, visibly shaken now. "You're going to be blacklisted for this." Katt smiled wide. "You think I wasn't already?" The room cracked with silence again. Terrence finally leaned forward. "There's a building. On the south side of the lot. Nobody films there. But people go in. And when they come out, some don't ever talk the same." Katt nodded. "I went in once," he said. "Stayed 10 minutes. Told him I had to use the bathroom. Then I walked off the set and never came back." The host couldn't speak. Terrence tapped the table once, like closing a book. "We're not asking for sympathy," he said. "We're just telling the part of the story nobody ever put in the scripts." Katt looked straight into the lens. "You want to know who helped him get there?" He tapped the contract again. "Start with this paper. Then follow the names not printed." Terrence looked down, not at the contract, at the silence between them. "There are people," he said, slowly, "who used to joke about the elevator that only went to one floor." Katt didn't laugh. "I was in that elevator," he said. "Twice." The host shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Katt leaned in, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. You know what it means when they give you your own dressing room before you've even read for the part. The host shook his head. It means the decision was already made, Katt said. You're not auditioning for a role. You're auditioning for compliance. Terrence spoke again, low and heavy. There are cameras. Not studio ones. Real ones. Hidden. I saw them. We all did. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. They told me not to ask questions. Said I'd ruin the mood on set. Katt folded the contract back into his coat. You ever wonder how someone can go from sleeping in a car to owning half of Atlanta without anyone asking what happened in between? The host looked down. He didn't ask that question. Not now. Terrence finally looked at the lens. I told myself for years, maybe he changed. Maybe he found God and left the rest behind. A long pause. But you can't build an empire on pain and call it healing. The chat exploded. Names were flying. Some people in disbelief. Others, not surprised at all. Katt glanced off camera. I'm not saying he's the only one. I'm saying he's the one nobody thought we'd talk about. A beat. Because they thought we needed him. Terrence nodded. They built him into a myth. The man who gave everyone a seat at the table. He looked directly into the camera again. But if you looked under the table, you'd see who wasn't allowed to eat. Katt sat back. People said I was crazy. People said Terrence was difficult. You hear that enough, you start to wonder if maybe they're right. He looked at Terrence. They weren't. The lights didn't dim. The crew didn't stop rolling. The truth was already out. And neither of them blinked. ChatGPT said. The host leaned back in his chair, no longer in control of the moment. Whatever outline he'd prepared for this episode, whatever safe questions, curated bullet points, it all evaporated somewhere between the contract on the table and the look in Terrence's eyes. He finally asked, why now? Katt tilted his head. Because silence used to buy us peace, he said. Now it just buys them time. Terrence added, and that time's running out. The host swallowed. Are you afraid? Katt paused, then smiled. Not playfully. Cold. Certain. No, he said. I was afraid when I was broke, when I was loyal, and when I kept my mouth shut. And none of that kept me safe. Terrence nodded slowly. Fear doesn't protect you. It just postpones the moment you lose everything. A producer off-camera signaled that they were live across 3 platforms, views spiking, the algorithm catching fire. Katt glanced toward the camera. You ever wonder how many NDAs are still active around this man? He leaned in. Think about how quiet it's been. Think about how loud it suddenly got. Just because we're sitting here. Terrence looked directly into the lens. They try to make us forget what we saw. But they forgot. Actors don't forget scenes. We live inside them. Katt reached in his coat again. Not for the paper this time, but for a flash drive. He placed it on the table. Black. Unmarked. This ain't a metaphor, he said. This is footage. The host stared at it. What kind of footage? Katt didn't answer. Terrence did. The kind that makes people say, we didn't know. But deep down they did. The host hesitated. Is that legal? Katt raised an eyebrow. Was what they did legal? Terrence leaned forward again. We're not here for drama. We're here because people keep asking what happened to certain actors. What happened to certain writers? What happened to all those brilliant people who just vanished? Katt pointed to the flash drive. Some of them didn't vanish. They were erased. The room went dead quiet. Katt stood. I ain't waiting for justice. I'm just done letting people think he's untouchable. Terrence stood too. He's not. The host looked at the camera, frozen, not sure if this episode would ever see daylight. But already had. By the time they left the studio, the internet had already broken open. Clips from the interview were being reposted with headlines like, Katt and Terrence just burned down Tyler Perry Studios with words. Flash drive on the table, what was inside? Is Hollywood finally turning on its safe bet? But it wasn't just noise anymore. Something deeper had shifted. Backroom PR teams were pulling up contracts. Executives were calling lawyers. Publicists were fielding texts that began with, did you see? And ended with, should we prepare a statement? Inside Tyler Perry Studios, security had been tightened. Not visibly, but internally. Staff were told not to respond to press inquiries. A scheduled public address was pulled. The press release drafted that morning now sat in limbo, every word suddenly feeling inadequate. And the drive? That black, unmarked flash drive? It was already duplicated. Terrence handed the second copy to a former showrunner who hadn't been seen in public in 6 years. She didn't say anything. She just took it in her palm, stared at it, and whispered, "Finally." Meanwhile, Katt disappeared for a day. Not into hiding, into clarity. He walked alone through Atlanta. No entourage, no press. A hoodie, sunglasses, and the weight of knowing that when you speak a forbidden truth, the silence that follows isn't empty. It's loading. Terrence spent that night in New Orleans, in a small, private courtyard owned by someone he'd known before the money, before the cameras, before the contracts. He lit a cigarette, watched the smoke rise, and whispered into the dusk, "It started." Because it had. The drive was already in the hands of 2 journalists in Europe, one independent documentarian in Canada, and a podcast team that specialized in redacted cases tied to the entertainment industry. None of them needed the whole truth. They just needed proof it existed. And now they had it. Within 48 hours, one of the journalists posted a still image from the footage. Blurred faces, dim lighting, but enough detail to prove it wasn't scripted. It went viral in under 10 minutes. Tyler Perry's name trended. Not with applause, with silence. The kind of silence people keep before choosing a side. And somewhere deep in the hills above Los Angeles, in a gated home where no mail arrives directly, a burner phone rang once, then twice, then stopped, and on the screen flashed a message. They're not finished talking. The message reached the right people. Not the ones on red carpets, not the verified accounts. The ones in the shadows of boardrooms. The ones who signed the checks but never appeared on call sheets. The ones who built the machine and taught it how to swallow talent, then spit out silence. They had seen scandals before, but this felt different. Not because of the names involved. Katt Williams had always been loud, and Terrence Howard had always been complex. But because this time there was no punchline, no redemption arc, no tabloid mess to clean. There was only the drive, and what it implied. Inside the studios, meetings turned hushed. Assistant producers whispered about contracts from the early 2000s. Old NDAs. Black vans that used to park outside the rear sound stages on Tuesday nights. Someone mentioned a name that hadn't been said in 15 years. Someone else asked, "Is it on the footage?" No one knew. Because that's the thing about erasure. You never know what made it past the fire until someone shows you a copy. And Katt had copies. Terrence, too. One of them had even passed a drive to a university archive disguised as a fictional docuseries project. It was now labeled Restricted Access, Media Study 541, but inside were scenes no screenwriter would dare invent. The chair of the department hadn't reviewed it yet, but a grad student had. She hadn't said a word, but she hadn't logged out either. She watched it twice, then burned the timestamp into her memory. It was real. Meanwhile, Katt reappeared. On stage. One mic. One spotlight. A room of 300. Phones in the air, eyes wide. He didn't tell jokes. He told truths. Slippery, sharp, undeniable. "I told y'all," he said, pacing slowly. "Hollywood didn't blacklist me for being crazy. They blacklisted me for staying sane when they tried to break me." He paused. "They broke others. You just didn't notice. You thought they were retired." Laughter didn't come. Not because it wasn't funny. Because it was too true. Back in L.A., Terrence met with an attorney. Not to sue. To testify. He'd seen what was in the footage. And he remembered what wasn't caught on camera. Names. Time. Places. That wasn't evidence yet. But it would be. He signed a sworn statement that night. The attorney didn't blink. "This will burn everything," he said. Terrence nodded. "Good." And as the sun set over the Pacific, the final copy of the flash drive was slid into a secure envelope. No name. No label. Just a sticky note that read, "For the ones who didn't get to speak." The envelope moved fast. From a private mailbox in Echo Park, it was picked up by a courier who didn't ask questions. He'd been paid in cash, twice his usual rate, with strict instructions. No scans, no tracking, no signatures. Just hands. Just movement. Just silence. Within 14 hours, it arrived at the doorstep of a woman in Baltimore. She wasn't famous, but she used to be close to someone who was. A production assistant who vanished from the industry after an accident no one could fully explain. One that happened after she tried to speak up about something she saw on a closed set. Something she never finished describing. Her name was never in the trades, but her story had lived quietly on message boards and in hushed green room conversations. The girl who saw too much. When she opened the package, she didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "They're finally doing it." She called one person. A journalist. Not mainstream. Independent. Known for posting stories that made networks nervous. "I have something for you," she said. "But if you touch this, you can't look away after." The journalist hesitated, then asked, "Is it him?" She said, "It's bigger than him." Back in Atlanta, Tyler's team was imploding. PR had gone silent. Assistants were resigning with vague posts about self-care and leaving toxicity behind. Production on 2 series was suddenly delayed due to creative reevaluation. And Tyler? He hadn't been seen in public since the video aired. But sources said his private jet had been grounded. That he'd returned to a compound in the Bahamas. That all outgoing communication from his office had been routed through legal. That a name from the footage had already hired protection. Katt wasn't hiding. He did an open mic in Chicago that night. No ticketed entry. Just walk in. A hat passed around the crowd. No security. He walked up to the mic and said nothing for 10 seconds. Then, they thought we wouldn't outlive their secrets. The crowd didn't cheer. They listened. He told stories. Real ones. About sets where the laughter was canned and the fear was real. About actors who got quiet after a single meeting. About writers whose scripts were bought, shelved, and never heard from again. "They don't need your silence anymore," he said. "They need your memory." In New York, Terrence met with a documentary filmmaker. She pressed record. He didn't flinch. He started with the first day he stepped onto that lot. The names they told him to avoid. The ones they said had already agreed. And the moment, 10 years ago, when someone pulled him aside and said, "If you speak about this, they will erase you." Terrence looked into the lens. They tried. He smiled. But I kept the receipts. The footage from Terrence's interview wasn't stylized. No dramatic lighting. No eerie music. Just a raw, unbroken frame. He sat in front of a bookshelf lined with unread scripts, old awards turned backward, and a single photo in a cracked silver frame. Him and an actor who hadn't been seen since 2011. He spoke calmly. The erasure doesn't happen all at once. First they stop returning calls. Then the projects stall. Then the tabloids come. Unstable. Difficult. Unprofessional. It's always the same words. He pointed at the camera, gently, as if it were a person. And you, watching this, you believed it. Because it was easier to believe I was crazy than to ask what made me go quiet. The documentarian sat across from him, silent. She had interviewed victims before. Survivors. Whistleblowers. But this wasn't that. This was a man reclaiming a memory that had been stolen. "The first time I said no to a deal," Terrence continued, "I was told I'd never work again. But the second time I said no, I wasn't warned. I was invited." He leaned in, face darkening. "They called a loyalty meeting. Said Tyler had been through it too. Said he understood. Said I'd feel better once I listened." He paused. "I didn't go." The documentarian swallowed. "What would have happened if you did?" Terrence didn't answer. He didn't have to. In Atlanta, a man who once managed Tyler Perry's early sets posted a single sentence to his locked account. "Everything they're saying is true." No hashtags. No tags. Just that. It was screenshotted 10,000 times within the hour. Meanwhile, the footage from the flash drive was being reviewed by legal teams at 3 major platforms, none of them eager to be the first to say what was on it. But the pressure was building. One platform executive leaked a message to an independent blog. "We didn't know what we had when we funded the docuseries. Now we're in too deep. And it's not fiction." Back in Los Angeles, an actor, unnamed but unmistakable, requested an off-the-record interview. He said he had something to add. The journalist asked why now. He said, "Because if Katt and Terrence survive this, the rest of us won't have an excuse anymore." In a quiet apartment above a comedy club in Brooklyn, Katt sat alone, phone off, lights low. He looked at an old photo on the wall. 5 men, 1 woman. Every single one of them had been swallowed by silence. He tapped the frame once and whispered, "Not this time." The next morning, his team posted a link. No caption, no intro, just a website, theunheardfiles.org. The site crashed in 12 minutes. The site came back online an hour later. No logos, no names. Just a black background and 5 folders. Each folder was labeled with a single word. Meetings, scripts, witnesses, footage, and buried. The first folder opened to audio clips, Muffled voices, conference calls, studio memos captured on phone recorders. In one, a voice said flatly, "We can't let him speak. Not after what he saw on stage 14. The second folder contained PDFs, scripts with red lines, writer's notes in the margins, scenes cut from shows before they ever aired. One note read, "Too close to what happened. Remove before table read." The witnesses folder was locked. A passcode was required. Beneath it, a countdown timer ticked down. 72 hours until release. People started guessing passwords. Nothing worked. The fourth folder, footage, held only one video. No sound. Just grainy surveillance-style clips. A hallway. A studio dressing room. A wide shot of a table with figures moving in and out of frame. One of them, unmistakably, Tyler Perry. The final folder, buried, had no files. Just a message. You never knew their names. But you watched their work. By dawn, over 4.7 million users had visited the site. Hollywood was silent. Major studios began issuing internal memos warning staff not to comment publicly. Lawyers scrambled to determine if the leak constituted breach of any non-disclosure clause, only to realize, in most cases, the originals had expired. The NDAs were old. The secrets, however, were not. On his private Instagram story, Terrence posted a black screen with white text. "The timer is real." Katt, meanwhile, posted nothing. No tweets. No jokes. Just presence. The world was talking for him now. And in those 72 hours, a question began echoing through entertainment boardrooms, newsrooms, and studio corridors. What if this isn't just about Tyler? Because behind every folder on the site, behind every silenced artist, every buried episode, every broken deal, was a pattern. And Katt and Terrence had only started to trace the outline.